Hey guys, welcome back to Magic the Gathering Online Finance, Economics, and Speculation. So, it's been a while, haven't been on in a bit. So, let's just jump right into it. Today we're going to do something slightly different on the show. We're going to have a little bit of a different topic. We're going to talk a little bit about Pauper today. And then I'll try to put out another episode where we get back to the meat and potatoes of this channel, which is just kind of looking at specs and price movements and trends and all that good stuff. But I've been kind of hinting here and there about doing some Pauper content, so I'm going to have a series of episodes, and I will label them clearly so that if you're not interested in Pauper stuff, you won't get trolled into accidentally watching or listening to any Pauper content if you don't want to. However, if Pauper is your thing, then you have just stumbled onto a real gem on the internet, because there's not a whole lot of people who are actually going to be aware of this channel. If you found this channel, then, you were doing some real obscure digging on the internet. I got to give you some props. And I have unique insights that you're not going to find anywhere else. And, well, anyway, let's get right into it, and I think you'll start to see what I'm talking about. So, my account is Making Smart Plays. That's me. I've had this account for quite a while. And I've been playing Pauper on this account since, I don't know, like 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. Basically, since dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I had a question popped up from PO1980. Thanks for all the shout-outs. Sorry I haven't been able to get back to all of your inquiries just yet. With work and everything, I stay pretty busy. But I really appreciate the comments, and I'll try to answer several of these questions. But anywho, one of the questions had to do with if I've had a 5-0 finish recently, or something along those lines, in the Pauper League. So here is the Friendly Pauper 5-match league, and when we open that bad boy up, we can look at, if we just look at the trophies ladder, I guess you could call it, you can click up here in the top right where it says undefeated trophies, and it'll list the players by how many trophies they've won. And the undisputed heavyweight champion is Tedly Ted with 22 undefeated trophies. After that, it really drops off to Carves and Sacra with 13 each. So basically, I mean, when you think about heavyweight contenders and champions, you think Mike Tyson, you think Tedly Ted. Apparently that's just how it works on Magic Online. Way down here at the bottom of the kind of sort of serious contenders, you find me, Making Smart Plays, with 6 trophies, which puts me in like a 4-way tie for 19th place or something like that in a league with 678 active players, which means I'm a very solid, respectable, kind of, decent-ish kind of player in this league. Not amazing, not like the baller boss of all time like Tedly Ted, of course. Gotta pay tribute there. But just kind of a decent, solid grinder. That's me. Some of my claim to fame in the Pauper world is back in the beginning when they first started doing Pauper Premier events. I finished first place in 3 of the online Pauper Premier events. There were actually Pauper tournaments that were player driven and player run. I never really played in any of that stuff. Maybe one here and there, I don't remember. But I think I played in the total rabbit trail here. They used to have player run standard Pauper, which was pretty sweet, and I played in a couple of those. Those were fun. But as far as just regular old Pauper goes, mostly in the beginning I just played in the actual challenge, the premier events online that are run by the regular Magic Online engine. And I managed to finish in first place 3 separate occasions. And I mean, those were events that were probably comparable today, like probably between 45 and 80 players, just depending on any given Sunday kind of thing. Since the premier events have come back, the best I've managed on a challenge is a top 8, and my internet crashed, so then that really didn't go well. And I've just kind of been dirtling around, finishing top 32, top 16, not really making a whole lot of money, not really losing a whole lot of money, just kind of goofing around. I think on the last one we had, I was actually able to play. I only get to play in between, like about a third of these, just because of my schedule. I started out 3-0 in the last Pauper Challenge and managed to finish a 3-3 with Stompy. So anyway, I've been playing Pauper for a very long time. I'm familiar with most of the different archetypes, the decks, and my story, for anyone who really cares, I'll try to keep this short for those of you who don't, is I've mostly lived in places where you can't go to a local game store since I started my professional career some 9 years ago or whatever. And I stay fairly busy, so Magic Online is really the only way I could play. And I just didn't want to have to drop the money to play in any of the other formats. But Pauper back in the day was very, very cheap, even cheaper than it is now because it hadn't quite fully taken off yet. So I think now I'd say the average cost for a Pauper deck is probably around $35. Back then the average cost for a Pauper deck was probably like $10 or $12, maybe $15. I mean, it was real cheap. And so I just started building some decks, you know, one or two, and playing and making some tickets, and I would just funnel my tickets into getting more Pauper cards, and I just kept doing that over and over and over. And over the years I now have 4 of every common, so I'm like a really rich Pauper. I'm ghetto rich. I am a rich poor person in the world of Magic Online, right? So being, you know, budget conscious and trying to make the most out of my tickets, I mean, that's why I kind of get a little bit into the speculation and finance. I'm not trying to get rich. I just want to help finance some of my play, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like that out there. So I just kept grinding Pauper, and now I'm at a point, since I have 4 of all the commons to play any deck I want, whenever new sets come out, I just drop a ticket or two and I'm able to get 4 of every common in each new set that comes out. You know, maybe you get 4 regular sets and maybe 1 extra random thing. So I would say for about, you know, somewhere between 5 to 10 tickets a year, I can maintain having all the commons, which is really not bad at all. That's just steadily grinding at it. The Pauper League has positive EV. Maybe I'll get back to talking about that later, but if you just steadily grind at it and you can win more than 50%, you're going to end up ahead at the end of the day. So I think Pauper's great. It's certainly one of the only reasons I am where I am in terms of still actually playing Magic Online, because it helped me make enough tickets to just keep going. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Let's kind of shift gears here and let's talk about the Pauper metagame. So I've played a lot of these decks, if not recently, then somewhere in the past. Some of these, you know, recently. A few of these I haven't actually played, but I've played against them. And I'm just going to give you my thoughts, because back when I was actually, you know, good at this game and winning tournaments, it's not because I'm a good player. My in-game name may be Making Smart Plays, but I make a lot of dumb plays. The smartest play I usually make is bringing a good deck to a tournament that's very meta appropriate if I'm doing anything right. If I am good at anything, I wouldn't say I'm great at analyzing the meta, but I'm decent. I'm probably better than average, but not a pro or anything like that. But sometimes it doesn't take much. Sometimes if you can just get a little edge in the, you know, the deck that you bring is just a little bit ahead in the meta against, you know, some stuff. Sometimes that's all you need to get just a few more wins and make some tickets. So anyway, Izzet Delver is currently the #1 deck in the meta. And we'll just pull up this list. It's 12.55% of the meta. And this deck, I've played it quite a bit. It's a very good deck. It's got a lot of play to it. Some of the things that, like this list, I don't like this list at all. I didn't actually look at this before I plugged in and started recording. I can just tell you off the cuff, I don't like this list because it doesn't have Brainstorm. One of the coolest things you can do with this deck is kind of be grinding card for card with your opponent. You know, you pop a Spell Stutter Sprite on a card they play, then you ninja it back, and then they kill your ninja. But you know, you're grinding ahead. As maybe you get in for 1 attack with the ninja, you get to replay the Spell Stutter Sprite again, and every time you play it and it lands and you're counterspelling something, you're getting ahead. And that can really be powerful, especially when you combine Gush, Brainstorm, Ash Barrens, Evolving Wilds, that kind of stuff. Like, let's say you're down to just having a brainstorm and a gush, and you left an evolving wild sitting on the table, so once you drew into the last half of your brainstorm gush combo, a lot of people know this stuff, you just pop off brainstorm after you gush, so you put 2 islands back in your hand from the board, and then you use brainstorm to put those islands back in your deck, and now you basically have totally reloaded your hand, and then you shuffle a couple of islands back in your deck with evolving wilds or ash barrens, and that's a huge play that can basically take you from trading card for card to an even board state to taking over the game. Obviously, if you can resolve a ninja and keep it on board, you're going to win. I mean, that's basically what you want to do. If you can get a Delver out and just kind of maintain enough counter spells and removal to ride that to victory, sometimes you can just get a fast tempo win. There's a lot of different things that the deck can do, just in terms of like play an augur, get a card, they kill your augur with like a bolt, but you still got a card, or maybe you ninja back your augur to your hand and they bolt your ninja, but you still got your augur back in your hand to recast to get yet another card. Same thing with spell starter sprites. I mean, the deck just has a lot of ways to inch a few cards ahead. I also don't particularly like just having the 18 lands with the 7 fetches. I guess the 7 fetches isn't bad. The fetches are sweet because they thin out your land, which is really nice in the late game. I like running 19 land in this deck because in my experience you will die to being mana screwed a fair amount of the time just because you're just so light on land, but you don't want to run too much. But I feel like you can afford to run 19 land if you've got the whole brainstorm. Maybe you have 8 fetches instead of just the 7. Get the full set of ash barrens. At any rate, without going too much in it, as we can see here, Tedly Ted has a 5-0 finish not too long ago with Izzet Delver, so clearly it has the baller stamp of approval. Again, Tedly Ted's the guy who's basically leading the league. Swirling Sandstorm in the sideboard. We'll just talk about the sideboard for a second. Swirling Sandstorm, very cool card. Hadn't seen much action until this deck came along. It's just kind of a solid one of in most lists. It's cool. Stormbound guys, pretty solid sideboard card. Relic, pretty standard stuff. Hydroblast and Hydroblast and Pyroblast. Being able to have both in your sideboard is one of the big payoffs for being blue-red. And then some Gorilla Shamans to ruin Affinity's day. Some of the issues this deck has on the other side, we've kind of talked about what this deck does well, what it's good at. A lot of these lists run Scred and Lightning Bolt, and one of the real issues this deck can run into is running into creatures that are too big to be removed by Lightning Bolt or Scred. This can be a real problem. Also, in the sideboard, usually you want some kind of sweeper to deal with. I'm kind of blanking. Boggles, like the Boggles deck that plays a bunch of enchantments and gains life, and it's non-interactive, and all the creatures have hexproof. Scred and Lightning Bolt can kind of get bricked in that matchup, so you want to be able to board in some kind of a 1 to 2 mana red 1 damage to all creatures sweeper. You'll see in the sideboards with this deck a fair amount of the time. At any rate, that's kind of the thing. In general, the deck runs into problems when it runs into creatures that get too big to be burned off the board, because it's tough because like maybe you want to have some bounce spells in your pile of 60 cards, but then sometimes bounce spells just aren't as good as the removal, and if you're going to lean on bounce spells, why not play Mono Blue Delver? And that's basically the trade-off between Izzet Delver and Mono Blue Delver. Izzet Delver basically has better sideboard access options, and typically the burn is better than just having access to bounce spells. And this is why Izzet Delver has 12.5% of the meta, and Mono Blue Delver has about 7% of the meta. But they're both mostly doing the same thing. It's just that Mono Blue has to lean more on bounce spells. Izzet actually gets removal. They both have their pluses and minuses, but the burn on the averages tends to be better, and the sideboard options you get when integrating red are definitely an improvement. So I probably won't cover Mono Blue Delver just because we've kind of already talked about it indirectly. Stompy is awesome. Stompy is pretty straightforward game plan. Go to the face, smash in, get there, get it done. Probably the most broken interactions you're going to see in this deck is Nest Invader plus Hunger of the Howlpack, because when Nest Invader comes into play, you get a 0/1 you can sacrifice to add a mana, so you can just play this guy next turn or that turn, sacrifice your 0/1 guy, drop Hunger of the Howlpack, put 3+1/+1 counters on a creature, which is a huge game. This particular list is not running the 1/1 flyer with lifelink. Here it is, the Vault Scourge. Sometimes putting Hunger of the Howlpack on a Vault Scourge, having a 4/4 flying lifelink, you know, like on the third turn of the game, swinging in for 4, that can just win the game outright sometimes. So basically, Hunger of the Howlpack and Rancor bring a whole lot of power. Vines of Vastwood's solid. Playing Vines of Vastwood on enemy creatures is also really sweet. Sometimes you can really disrupt your opponent by not allowing them to target their own creature, especially combo-oriented decks. And a lot of Stompy players know that, some don't, but that's a huge play. Mutagenic Growth is running some of these deck lists. Bone Splitter's running some of these deck lists. But I think the strongest, River Boa, like putting Hunger of the Howlpack on a River Boa can definitely be strong stuff. Hunger of the Howlpack on a Skarg can be a big game. A Skargan Pit Skulk. So, but anyway, yeah, this deck is really at its strongest when it's dropping Hunger of the Howlpack and Rancor. That's kind of what you want to be doing. Burning Tree Emissary into Burning Tree Emissary into like Nest Invader is also a pretty big game. Quarian Ranger is awesome because if you're on a 1-land hand, you can just drop a Quarian Ranger and she will actually enable you to have 2 mana on turn 2 with 1 forest by just tapping it, bouncing it to your hand, replaying it, and tapping it again, enabling something like a Burning Tree Emissary chain into a Burning Tree Emissary or whatever off of 1 forest. So the deck has a lot of fun interactions. Scattershot Archer is pretty sweet. This sideboard here seems to be Gleeful Sabotage is definitely a sweet 4-of in most sideboards because it's good against Boggles, it's good against Affinity. If somebody decides to board in Circle of Protection green, it gives you something you can do there. In the mirror match, being able to kill your opponent's Vault Scourges can be a big game. So Gleeful Sabotage is just sweet. Serene Heart here, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think I would rather just lean on Gleeful Sabotages, and then if you want to have extra artifact and enchantment removal, I like the 1 green mana instant that kills an artifact or an enchantment with converted mana cost 3 or less. The Boggles deck, all its key enchantments are 3 mana or less, and against Affinity you can just go after its land, because land destruction for 1 mana I hear is, you know, not terrible. So how about that? Feed the Clan, it looks like this Burn is showing up a lot, picking up a lot of percentage in the metagame right now, so they're trying to fend off Burn decks with some Feed the Clan action here. I really don't like the River Boa on the sideboard on this list. Viridian Longbow is a card I definitely want in my sideboard 15. I kind of like this sideboard plan a little better than the other one we were just looking at. 2 Relics, 3 Scattershots, 3 Viridians, 3 Epic Confrontation, 4 Gleeful Sabotage. This is a solid sideboard. And Elephant Guide can be a big game as well. This is probably, if you're going to play Stompy, I don't really know about not having any Vault Scourges. I think Vault Scourge can just win you some matches all by its lonesome once you've put a Hunger of the Howlpack or a Rancor or something, or an Elephant Guide on it. I might tweak this list a little bit, but generally this is kind of what you want to be doing. And Stompy, let's talk about Stompy can have a really good game against Izzet Delver, especially if the more of the pinging stuff you've got. If you've got like the 3 Viridian Longbows and the Elves to tap to knock out flyers, you can really devastate Izzet Delver if you can thoroughly control its flyers and get creatures on board so that Ninja can't get through and you can just overrun them. Stompy can... You might think that because Stompy has a lot of one casting cost creatures that the Spell Stutter Sprite would make Izzet Delver the supreme champion deck in the matchup, but once you go to sideboard, if Stompy has its sideboard set up correctly, it can certainly become the favorite post sideboard. If it explodes and it's on the play, it can even get so far ahead that Izzet Delver just has a hard time catching back up. And sometimes Izzet Delver stumbles on its land, mana, colors. Any of these things, if Stompy has a perfect start or near perfect start, it can easily run over Izzet Delver. I think Izzet Delver is slightly favored pre-sideboard and Stompy's favored post-sideboard. Kuldotha Boros is interesting. It's probably favored against Stompy and maybe even match up with Izzet Delver. I really respect this deck as a good deck, but I personally cannot stand piloting Kuldotha Boros. It makes me want to stab myself with a fork, which would be a dumb thing, so I don't do that. But it's just very dirtily. It's got a great game plan. The removal is super efficient. Prismatic Strands is awesome. Battle Screech is a great card. It's just red-white value. It uses Glinthawk and Core Skyfisher, Palace Sentinels, and Prophetic Prism, Alchemist Vial, these kind of things to generate card advantage. So like you play a Prophetic Prism, you bounce it with your Glinthawk, you replay your Prophetic Prism, you bounce it with your Skyfisher, you play Thraben Inspector, you bounce it with your Core Skyfisher. You just keep getting cards. Your removal is super cheap and efficient, so if instead of dirtling around for years paying 4 and 5 mana to draw a card, which feels terrible, but you don't have to worry about pressure because you've got this nice package of removal cards that are all quite cheap. Journey to Nowhere is usually played as a couple of in these lists, and eventually you control the game with some flyers and removal, and you play Palace Sentinels. And after you play Palace Sentinels, you get an emblem that says you're the Monarch, and you draw a card at the end of every turn, as long as your opponent doesn't deal any combat damage to you, which basically means you win the game. If you're drawing 2 cards a turn every turn, and your opponent can't get through to deal combat damage, that game's basically over. In the sideboard, this deck has stuff to deal with burn, to deal with affinity, various graveyard strategies. It has little interaction with blue decks, Gorilla Shamans, Electrickery to deal with boggles and stuff like that, since a lot of the other removal is not going to be doing much. Overall, this is a very well balanced deck that can have game against most things in the meta and can definitely get there. I don't particularly enjoy playing this deck, but it is a very good deck, and if it fits your style, I definitely recommend it. So Dendrovatron is having some troubles right now. It is 4th in the meta at 7.79%, and then Burn at 7.79%. But the numbers that MTG Goldfish has, keep in mind, this is all a guessing game. Goldfish doesn't get to look at perfect information. Wizards holds back a lot of data. But when you look over here, you'll see Burn, Burn, Burn. Burn's just showing up a lot. And I suspect that Burn is one of the better highly played decks out there right now. Or I bet it's played a lot more than Dendrovatron. It's probably putting up a lot more 5-0 lists, but we only get 5 results a day. So anyway, Dendrovatron I think particularly does suffer against Burn, just because while we do have access to some life gain, we've got Pulse of Murasa, and we got like Prohibit, Condescend, but what the deck really lacks is removal, like really strong removal. And this is definitely a problem. This deck really does its best leaning on Moment's Peace, which can really be a tough matchup for Stompy, because Moment's Peace, if they can chain those out, certainly that can cause some problems. But I think that Denrovatron, the shift in burn doing so much better lately and not having removal. And the reason removal matters is because if the burn deck manages to stick a Firebrand Archer or a Thermo Alchemist, or God forbid both, and you don't get those off the board right away, the damage adds up so fast. Like, burn is already a deck that can kill you just by throwing burn to your face old school, but when each of your burn spells does an extra point of damage, that is huge. And if each of your burn spells does 2 extra points of damage, all you got to do is throw 4 lightning bolts and the game's over. I mean, imagine 4 burn spells, GG, and they only cost 1 mana. I mean, that's what happens when you get a Thermal Alchemist and a Firebrand Archer out there. Burn can also pivot and start using its burn spells to kill off your creatures, play kind of a grindy match where it actually kills you by just tapping Thermo Alchemist for value while using burn to kill your creatures, letting Curse of the Pierced Heart bleed you to death, and attacking in with Firebrand Archer and also pinging you as it goes. So this deck has a lot of versatility against dirtily slow control decks. It can just go for the jugular. Against creature decks, it can try to control the board and just bleed you to death. And Thermo Alchemist and Firebrand Archer together has certainly revolutionized the deck. Firebrand Archer is starting to be picked up, integrated into the deck, becoming a mainstay, and it's really forcing decks to be able to interact with and kill off some creatures. This is where Denrovatron, I think, is having some problems and maybe stumbling a little bit. It has some other matchups that can be problematic, but basically Denrovatron is on the decline right now. I think basically because of Burn. Burn has been doing real well. Burn is one of those decks that can get there. There's a lot of Burn decks doing well right now, but if you go up against an opponent that can something like Clodatha Boros, just in its mana base, it's got like stuff like Radiant Fountain and Windscarred Crag. So its land gains life, so it drops a Radiant Fountain and gains 2 life. Then it plays Boros Garrison, bounces Radiant Fountain, replays Radiant Fountain, then plays a Core Skyfisher, picks up its Radiant Fountain, and plays it again. And suddenly the deck is just gaining 2 life every turn. And the minute the red deck plays down its red creatures to try to ride them to victory, they get burned off the board instantly. And, you know, Burn tries to have a big turn, and Prismatic Strands shows up, and then we go to sideboard, and another Prismatic Strand comes in, and Lone Missionaries come in. And then Core Skyfisher starts picking up Lone Missionaries and replaying them. So stuff like this, just dirtling around, gaining life, can really be really rough on a Burn deck, obviously. And then something like Izzet Delver, you know, maybe if you can take out a few counter spells with your spell starter sprite, and if you've got some Dispels and Hydroblasts in the board, then maybe you can just control enough of those burn spells to eke out a victory. So Burn is not like a silver bullet to the format. In fact, Burn has some matchups that it really struggles with. But, you know, like Clodatha Boros, I think has a reasonable game, especially if the sideboard's tuned. But, you know, Burn is certainly on the rise and is one of the top decks. Affinity is a deck that is down to 6% of the meta right now, at least in terms of the MTG Goldfish approximation of the meta. And, you know, in the not too distant past, a couple months ago, Affinity was, I think, number 1 in the meta. We just have a lot of decks with red that are up here that have a lot of serious hate coming in on Affinity. Affinity is still an absurdly strong deck. It just gets hated on a lot, and that can certainly cause some problems for it. Izzet Blitz is a really interesting deck. I guess depending on what you find interesting, but it's just trying to land a Nivix Cyclop or a Killing Fiend and then get in there for 20. Ideally drop something like a Temur Battle Rage, Gitaxian Probe, and a mutagenic growth, and, you know, a good game. That's basically it. Maybe hold up a Daze and an Apostle's Blessing to protect your guys in case they have a removal shot. So pretty much a one-trick pony deck. You can do a few different things, but that's basically the deck. And you know, if you're playing against an opponent that has a real heavy control suite, you got to get in there pretty fast, or odds are they will overtake you in the long game, control the board, and blow you out. You know, sometimes you can fight back if you're sideboard. You know, stuff like Dispel, you know, Pyroblast. Maybe you can kind of go a little bit of a distance, but it's really just a horse race. You know, it's not really a combo deck, but it plays basically like a combo deck. You're just trying to get in there, get it done. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's very powerful, and it can also. I've seen different lists running between 17 to 19 land. Sometimes you might have problems hitting your land drops if you're running a lighter land version. If you play the heavier version, sometimes you'll draw way too much land, and well, that's also problematic. But at any rate, nothing hugely special here. It's solid, can get it done. Boggles, this is the deck I was talking about earlier. This is a cool deck. You just play hexproof creatures, drop enchantments. You really are trying to go to town with an ethereal armor or an ancestral mask. And Armadillo Cloak sometimes is the game winner, sometimes doesn't really matter that much because the game's over. If you can get in there with an ancestral mask, you know, that may be all it takes with a Rancor or something. But the problem with Boggles is there's a lot of hate for this deck in terms of board sweepers in the sideboard. And if you happen to be so unfortunate as to go up against Dimir Control, or any other deck out there that runs black, there's a lot of Chainer's Edicts floating around right now. And this makes it kind of tough. Stuff like Shrivel, there's just Evankar's Justice, there's a lot of stuff out there to just make it a real pain to get through, but it's very matchup dependent. You know, some matchups that aren't very interactive can really go your way. One of the biggest problems I think right now for Boggles is because Stompy is so well positioned, and because Gleeful Sabotage is a mainstay there. And typically if Stompy can get off to a good start, it just needs to hit one Gleeful Sabotage and it can be game over. So that's a bit of an issue right now for Boggles. Dimir Control I feel like is just way too dirtily right now, especially with where Burn's at. Sometimes Dimir Control can get there, but it's an issue. Inside Out's a very powerful combo deck. It's pretty old school actually. I don't know how many people realize that Tireless Tribe Inside Out was a deck people kind of tinkered around with long ago, but it's kind of come back around and people are giving it a go once again. Basically, you just chunk cards to Tireless Tribe, and then you Inside Out, and boom, you have 20 damage coming in after chunking, you know, most of your hand or all of your hand, depending on where you're at in the game. Gush is a huge game here because you get 4 cards off of 1 card, and that's just absolutely absurd. Gitaxian Probe is ridiculous because you get to see your opponent's hand and find out for sure that it's a safe time to get in there and win. Gigadrouse serves to shut down your opponent to make sure they can't stop you when you go to combo. Dizzy Spell will pick you up either Gigadrouse or a Tireless Tribe if you're just really struggling to find one, or maybe, you know, I don't know, a Dispel if you're concerned about your opponent trying to get tricky. Circular Logic is also super powerful. That may be part of why this deck is certainly starting to show up more on the radar these days with its printing in Modern Masters. But the card has a big game in this deck because you can chunk it to Tireless Tribe. I believe, let's see here, Green Priney I think is the guy who really innovated on this deck and it made it a major thing right now, so props there. And yeah, that's most of what I wanted to cover. This blue-red right here is actually, I think this is just Is It Blitz. Yeah, this is more Is It Blitz. They just have it severed out. So really when you add this 2.6% to the other 5.63. That's like 8% of the meta. So I mean, actually, this is it Blitz would be like one of the top, top 3 or 4 or 5 decks or whatever. It's kind of in there. I want to talk a little bit about Deluxecoff. This guy has his own YouTube channel and does a live stream thing. I think it's Pauper Ganda. Really cool guy. Incredible innovator. He's recently been piloting this mono black deck that is really interesting. So if you gotta check this thing out. This is really wild. He's running 4 creatures: Thorn of the Black Rose, Duress, Raven's Crime, Vendetta, Chainer's Edict, Diabolic Edict, Sign in Blood, Read the Bones, Siphon Life, Evanker's Justice, Snuff Out, 4 Pristine Talisman, Bojuka Bogs, Quicksands, Radiant Fountain, and Swamp. So this looks like a real wild ride. It looks like he's trying to ride out to victory. Probably just, on the back of slamming a Thorn of the Black Rose, really controlling the board, using Raven's Crime, Sign in Blood, Read the Bones, and of course Thorn of the Black Rose to get big card advantage. Probably win the game through Siphon Life and Evankar's Justice. Quicksand is so awesome because it takes ninjas down so well, and it's really hard for blue-red decks to stop. It can also take out a Killing Fiend, and there's not a whole ton. There's a few things that the Izzet Blitz can do. There's a few things, but you can't like Apostle's Blessing and get protection from land. So this deck has a lot of interesting play to it. It may just look like a pile to you if you just look at this and go, what the hell, how do you win, what's going on with this thing? But I can assure you that it's a very interesting, probably really fun deck if you like to play control. I don't know if I would necessarily want to be running this in a burn meta right now, but it's interesting. I just wanted to point out a deck here by Deluxecoff and give a shout out, point out a little hidden gem there. If you go check out his stuff, if you're into Pauper, I think you'll enjoy it. So that's basically all I wanted to cover today. I just wanted to do a quick pass through on some of the main decks in the Pauper meta. Hope you enjoyed it. I know there's a lot of rambling there, but that's just a general breakdown. Overall stuff I recommend. I think I recommend Izzet Delver, Stompy, Koldothaboros, Burn, Affinity, Izzet Blitz, Inside Out combo. That's about it. Knowing the decks and knowing the matchups is huge. Playing what you're comfortable with is huge. There's a lot of stuff in the Pauper meta you can play. It's a little bit like Legacy. You can't just go dirtling in with anything, but there's a lot of variety in what you can run. So anyway, that's all I got for you today. This is kind of our first installment on really looking at Pauper in particular. And I'll try to also get back to producing a regular, speculation, card evaluation, economics kind of stuff. Maybe put another episode out tomorrow on that. So you guys take care. Peace.